started this week. Thank you for joining me for Why with One Stop. I'm Sam Hayes, and I would like to share with you what went wrong this week and how we fixed it. Also need to mute my phone because, of course, it's not a webinar of any sorts whatsoever unless there's some sort of technical difficulties. Sam Hayes, I've done this for over 20 years. This is my take on what I've seen go right and go wrong. From a risk management perspective, I am a licensed realtor, notary, CAR certified transaction coordinator, and forms trainer. I do need to renew and finalize my test, but I have been doing that for over 12 years now. Okay, so this is kind of a combination. I'm going to be doing this monthly of what went wrong over the past week and month really, and what were some of the big things that we saw that were problems and how did we fix them? Big one I had happen a couple of different times, which is just kind of shocking to me, is who's selling? Who's on title? Who is doing this? I had about 3 different files that we had to go back and add sellers to the transaction. I highly suggest and recommend that you always pull a property profile prior to going on any listing agreement. Even if you know everybody, you don't know if was it in the trust? Did they take it out of the trust to refi? Did we end up doing some sort of loan thing? We added on a family member. Did a family member originally help with everything? We paid them back, but we forgot to take them off a title. Who's selling the property? Who is supposed to be on title? Now, there are different things and different takes. My focus is whoever is on that deed, I want on those contracts. You're financing what you've done, that as long as it doesn't list that person on owning that property, I'm not worried about it. I want to know who's on the title, who's allowed to sell, and who's part of the transaction. You can, with a listing agreement, start with one of the sellers. However, you have to have that listing agreement fully executed by all sellers prior to close of escrow, and a contract is not executed with just one seller. We need to make sure everybody's on board. Both situations I had, we didn't restart the timeframes, but technically they could have because they were not fully executed contracts. That can cause delays. That can cause issues. That is something that I pick apart holes in. So what I highly recommend is make sure you pull that property profile, and TCs, make sure you're taking a look at the prelim just to know the names, who's listed. Years and years ago, I had a deal where back when we had the land of paper files everywhere. And with that, I had an issue where we had a brother and sister, and the brother tried to, because it was Francis and Francis with an E and with an I, and the brother tried to come in and say that they had signing rights. So just be smart. Make sure you're double checking this. Also with trusts, I've had several incidences where I've been told they're the only signer for the trust. We don't have to show you signing authority. Well, we all know that in the contract, and I'm going to mess up the numbers because we just changed everything, but I believe it's RPA 20, it's either 23 or 32. I keep flipping in my head, or 26. The signing authority, that is actually supposed to be provided, proof of signing authority, not what you get from escrow, but there is a document. Every trust, every incorporation, everything along those lines that are created has a doc specifically to say, this is who we are, who's allowed to sign. Doesn't tell me who gets the cat, doesn't tell me who's getting the money, but I want that document because the document you get from escrow is notarized, yes, but the notary is only validating the signature on the document. They're not validating the contents. I've had 2 different deals that ended up closing where we just got a Band-Aid last minute from escrow. Nobody pushed it through, even though I brought it up in the file. Luckily, there's not been problems, but what if? And as a TC, that's my job. I live in the land of what if. I lived in the land of paranoid freak. Let's get that out of the way so you don't have to worry about it. Let's get the facts, let's get the documents and get it handled. No big deal. But it also helps you just so you know who you're talking to and you're not wasting your time having to double do and we go back and redo files. I have a lot of clients right now who are both the loan broker and the sales broker. Now, what this situation is if you are under the same broker, the head broker. So if the broker for the lender and the broker for the sales real estate are the same individual, you need to, within 24 hours of the buyer agreeing to use both services under that broker, sign an LBSB. That is to be on file. That is civil code. I'm going to do a separate video about that, going in all the nitty gritty, because a lot of people have never ever heard of it. when you're in that situation, then you're going to have the seller sign off so that they are aware of what's going on as well. Listing agent does not have to unless listing agent, for some reason, is doing the loan for the buyer side. Now you can do lending for the buyer and be the listing agent. You can do lending for the buyer and be the buyer's agent. You can be the buyer and the seller's agent, but you cannot be all three. You got to have somebody else in there so that there's checks and balances. This is a form that you want to make sure you have on file for DRE audits, especially if you are representing the side that is working with both the lending and the selling portion of the transaction. Another issue we had come up. It's never too soon to start talking to your paperwork, your sellers about your paperwork. I have run into several situations recently where things were in boxes or they didn't know where to go find it, or suddenly we're extending out time frames because this is material fact, even if it's not one of the actual disclosures. When a seller suddenly is now sharing photos, or we have surveys or any of these additional documents, that's material fact, and the buyer gets time to review that. It's always best practice to err on the side of so we don't have duress or whether they were forced to get these things done. So that 5-day window is usually what I default to. Always double check with your contract and your broker of record. Talk to your sellers. Start asking questions when you're walking around the property, when they are telling you all the wonderful upgrades they did and they're so proud of this. And oh, Mary, do you remember when we had this big water leak? Well, how'd you guys fix it? Was it an insurance claim? Oh, it's more than 5 years. We don't have to tell you. Do you though? I mean, have to. And risk management. It's always best practice to make sure that you're getting as much information. The more we can show on third party, the disclosures are basically a history of the house. They're good, bad, and ugly. They're not the marketing materials. We don't want them pretty. I kind of want them messy. I want to know what happened and how you fixed it, or hey, I didn't. And if they didn't, that's okay too. It's in the contract. All California properties are sold as is of the time of the execution of the contract. So if the grass is green, the grass stays green. But if the pool's green because nobody's taking care of it, unless you guys negotiate that in repairs, it gets to stay green. Make sure you know what you are selling. Make sure you've got all the information. Start talking to your sellers, empower them, do it when we're not rushing. We don't have everything packed in a pod on its way to Montana. Take a beat when you're talking to them, explain what they're going to need. If you need somebody to help walk them through it, happy to do that. I have a video that I need to update. It's an older one. It's kind of an introductory video that I send to all my listing clients and my listing sellers, explaining you only know what you know. And if you suddenly wake up at 2 in the morning, I'd rather you told me, let's do an addendum to the documents or get me over your receipts. We'll send it over. It is much better to get that information over to everybody and just go, oops, I forgot. Buyers and sellers don't live and breathe in this stuff the way we do. So they're not thinking the way we do. Sometimes they've never actually sold the property before, or it's been 20 years. They have no idea. They've lived there, they've raised their kids. This has just been their home and their house. You're having them look at it in a different perspective, and you got to give them some grace and some time to get that done. So let's get to that sooner than later. It's also a good reason why you want to start your disclosures during your listing period. Now that we're ramping up, we're having a little bit more time on market. It's a great time to go ahead, go through the disclosures, let them ask the questions. The questions are going to trigger them to remember things. That's the whole point of all the questions in the SPQ, TDS, SPQA, ESD, PSD, blah, blah, blah. My whole other language, I speak zip form fluently. With all of those docs, that's how you're going to be able to do your best risk management, mitigate what you can, and share the knowledge and the history of the property. Let's see, what else do we have going on? Okay, this has been another big one. It is not a commission. Stop writing commission. It's not a commission. We have 3 contracts now. We have 1 property, but we have 3 contracts. You have your listing agreement. So this is the seller and the listing agent. We are agreeing to sell this property, and a commission is negotiated in that. We have a buyer and a buyer's broker. And because of AB 2992, now California law, or because if you are part of an NAR member and under the settlement, we have that written agreement which negotiates that commission between the buyer and buyer's agent prior to going under contract. And then I think of it like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I'm aging myself. But then this buyer and this seller choose their champions to come negotiate for them together on this contract. But the agents are not party to that contract. It's the buyer and the seller. So that is not where commission discussed. Commission's over here. Commission's over here. A concession can be discussed here for the buyer to pay this, but that is not the seller paying the buyer's broker. Make sure you get that mindset. It's a really big shift from what we are so used to in our industry, but you want to make sure it's one property, three separate contracts. And it's not your contract. You're not party to the contract. So don't talk about your commission in the contract. If you are going to be giving a credit to your client, take that into account when you are negotiating, asking for that concession in RPA 3G3. Take that into account for how much you are asking in concession. Take that into account when you're talking about your buyer broker agreement. And then we'll have to modify and clean that up. But the more you do these little pieces and things, and people are so used to going, oh, I'll just throw my commission in as a credit to my client. It's not as easy as it was before. It's doable. And it's not a problem, but we have multiple steps because we have three contracts. So we have to step through and we have to do modifications to these other two contracts over here that deal with commission and then figure out how we're getting to the number for the credit on your purchase agreement. It's really kind of confusing and get murky, but when you stop, do it step by step and think about it, it's great. But do not, oh, I'm just going to give him money on my commission, just do an addendum to the contract. Nope, nope. It's not how we do it. Not how we do it. Make sure you're working with somebody who understands the whole process. Make sure you're working with somebody who can walk you through it. I'm happy to discuss it anytime. I have several other videos that are up on my YouTube, or feel free to call me. We can break it down, go through the steps. Always verify with broker of record, go with your file checker. Make sure they're allowing you to give that credit. Because remember, the commission is the broker's. And then you have your splits and everything else below as an agent of record. So the new thing, the SPBB, and I was going to do a slide, but I didn't, but it's like the SPBB is RIP. I've seen more references to the SPBB in contracts this month, and I know we just did the change. It's been a little challenging because people are so not used to this. It's all here. It's all right here. We've got it. It's all here in all the verbiage you need. Everything is here. So you don't need that extra form. You don't need to reference that extra form. It doesn't exist. And when you're countering, if the seller wants to only give a certain amount of credit, you're going to reference 3G. And then is it just a regular credit for closing costs? Is it 3G2? We need some credit for, hey, that carpet. We're getting some credit for, hey, we're going to help with maybe some buy downs. Hey, the HOA's got an increase coming up. We're going to throw in for that an assessment. And then, oh, okay, well, we're going to give you a concession for this commission the buyer is paying to the buyer's agent. And if the seller wants to reduce any of these, you're going to specifically respond or specifically reference RPA 3G and then whichever one of the three subcategories that apply. This was fun. I know we're all starting to get used to this and trying to figure out the balconies and what are we doing? And well, there was this delay on this and everything else. Okay. So with this right now, with the new balcony for addendum, and I'll show you which one it is. If it is in an HOA, all you have to do is sign it. You're just going to sign the document that you've told them it's HOA's responsibility. They're supposed to keep it on file. If you have somebody who has a 1 to 3 multi-unit, all one APN, one seller, we have tenants, but we don't have separate owners within the building, you're going to need to have this report on file. That will be the responsibility of that seller since it's their controlled parcel, their controlled property. They're in charge of all of it. That report's going to have to go over, and that will be a disclosure we're going to start looking for starting in January 2026. But for now, if you got anybody in a condo and we've got anything that's 6 feet off the ground, that's a wood type of structure, we got stairs, we got balconies, anything along those lines, it's on the HOA. And we're going to go ahead and indicate that. Now, if your client is aware that they have seen, or the HOA sent out a letter and said, we've got the report and everything else, they can indicate that on the SPQ. This should say SPQ. I didn't update this correctly. This is on 6K. And if that's marked yes, then we're definitely going to want to say double check with the HOA, verify all with the HOA. Typically, your sellers are not going to have a copy of the report and the certification. And this is not a new requirement. It's been something that's been around for a while. It's just that the law went into play as of January 1 for the condos this year, 2025. And for the multi-unit properties, it's 2026. What I was checking, which our concern was, I didn't want any liability on my seller. If she's in a condo, we didn't want any issue on that because, well, she doesn't know how she's going to get this report. In the WBSA, so the wood balcony stairs addendum, and this is an addendum. So remember, if you're adding this to your contract, you are adding this in. This is not a quick disclosure. This is not just something floating in your file. This is an addendum and changing your contractual terms. With this, number 3 lets anybody know who's in a condo, anything along those lines. This is on the HOA. So this verbiage does say that if it's there, that they don't have the obligation. The HOA does, but not your actual client. This also clarifies which inspectors are allowed to give you the report. So if you do end up with a report, you can cross-reference, hey, is it somebody who falls under the civil code approval? Because this code is under health and safety. Whole point of this is trying to keep everybody protected, make sure that we don't have some of the incidences that have happened cross country, some of these older buildings, and just maintenance overall, because safety is important. Managing timeframes, expectations, and contractual agreements. I know that it's been a different market than we've had for a while, and I understand we're all very excited and anxious and want to get back into doing things. However, if you have hired a vendor, myself, escrow, title, lender, you're working with somebody, make sure that you are giving appropriate timeframes and appropriate expectations. Following up hourly doesn't really help anybody get anything done. So I highly expect or encourage and hope that you are able to know the people you work with, communicate your urgency, which we're all aware everything's urgent. But if you have an extreme urgency or a time frame or something that has to be in to get to loan docs, if you convey that, then we can all work together. But at the same time, if we could back this out and manage the expectation, well, my seller wants to know, is the deposit in? They have 3 business days. When we've signed on a Saturday, they've got till Wednesday at 11:59 per the contract. Sam, escrow's not open at 11:59. I understand that. But the contract states that they have a full business day to get that done. You can notice to perform 2 days before something is due if you have concerns. We want to document that. Well, my seller doesn't want to bother them. This is a point of education. This is a point of an opportunity to show this is an administrative document that we have that's a tool so that we are documenting per the contract that you have agreed to the different steps and how to properly notice. It helps get some of the emotion out. Residential real estate is incredibly emotional. This is your home. This is your protection. This is where you raise your family. This is where you had your first big, huge party. This is someplace you built with your hands, all these different things. It's very emotional. And the upleg and the reasons for, as we know, for having to sell can also be very emotional when you're dealing with divorce and death and new family and change and new jobs and so many levels of things. Let's take some of that emotion out by getting facts. And let's make sure our clients are educated with that transparency thing we're working on of facts and timelines and clarity. And if you're taking the time to explain this when you're going through the contract, when you're managing the expectations before we've accepted the offer, before we go into countering, just kind of like, hey, here's the steps, here's how it's going to go, the better things are going to go for your whole escrow. Take the time and communicate. Don't worry about it. I don't want to bother anybody. It's not the bother. It's the panic. It's the freak out. It's the, well, we don't know what conversation you just had. We didn't hear the tone. We don't know all those triggers. We know that all your different vendors are working through all the other agents that we happily support with no problem, along with yourself. And we're so grateful for your business. But at the same time, we've got to juggle stuff, just like you juggle your clients. So honor us enough, have enough faith in who you've hired to go ahead and communicate expectations so we can work together. Because we're all independent contractors, or you've chosen with a vendor who is got a corporation or something along those lines, but we all have different time frames of how we run our days. So let's communicate, make sure that everybody's on the same page so we can manage all those expectations. As always, I am available pretty much 24/7, 365. You can reach me at 619-993-7264, or I'm available email and on Facebook, YouTube, Blue Sky, all the Instagram, all of the fun things out there. Next week, I'm going to have Anthony from Home Warranty of Anthony Castaneda from Home Warranty of America to join me, talking about home warranties, talking about what works, what doesn't work, talking about are you educating your client, managing expectations again, what they do cover, what they don't cover, and why the different levels matter, and why it's important to really know what property are you trying to ask for coverage on. As always, thank you so much for being here. Verify everything with the broker of record. This is Sam Hayes. This was Why with One Stop. What went wrong? And here's how we got it right. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me.